Okay, you saw last week some of those buildings that were famous from that period, and quite a lot of which are still standing. And now I'll move on to music and literature. I said it. Did I get started? I don't really get started on this last week, but I wanted to. I think I did say a little bit about that basic fact that um, we don't remember at all the classical period composers of Britain, or maybe if you're really good at music, you might know one or two names. Not much, not much. When you think of Beethoven, Mozart, and then it's a big, nothing British until you get to the Beatles. and then you've got, medieval music and early modern music that's not so famous. I mean, could you tell me any European composers from this period? Probably not. Okay. Unless you're really a specialist in music, you probably wouldn't know those names or that music even. But these names are as famous as any of the European names of that time. Okay, so if we said like the really famous music is classical music, this music is less famous than that. But inside it, there are plenty of British or English composers. Whereas this one that's famous, they're all German or French or Italian or Russian, and there are very, very few British, inside the classical music. But when it comes to early modern music, we've got chamber music, which consisted of small numbers of musicians. It could be 4, it could be 6, it could be 8. That music, really, there was no big difference between England and the rest of Europe at that time. You can see we've got this that looked like a piano, and it was developed in medieval times, and this is what they had rather than a piano. And that's what it sounded like. That's by William Byrd, okay? Okay. And so, moving on, yes, you can see a lot of instruments like this that look like kind of guitars, but aren't quite. That one especially looks very similar to a guitar, and is a sort of early version. But early versions of violins and early versions of guitar-like instruments and of flutes and things. As I say, the recorder, last week I played a little piece of a recorder. You can see a whole range of recorders up here, different sizes. They're all pretty much the same today as they were in those days. Most of the other instruments have changed and have developed into modern versions. So the instruments themselves are rather different. But, specialists still play them, and you can still, if you have enough money and you can find a specialist to make one, you can still have such an instrument, or you can buy an original. My tutor at university had an original one of these called a virginal in his room, okay, which he'd paid thousands of pounds for and was very proud of. So, yeah, these are modern reproductions of those instruments. And you can see, like, that's an early violin with the bow. But a lot of the music you'd have got in the church. This kind of singing, again. Remember the kind of singing that they did in the monasteries, and the Catholic kind of church singing. They remember changing the singers there, moving choirs, the swing birds sang, talking about how progressive the monasteries across the Pacific. It's all done. Religious music as well. So this is another version. It's again by Ian Byrne, who is famous for instrumental music and vocal music. One of the most famous of his musicians. And just to give you a sort of montage of these are the churches that they prayed in, this is the music that they listened to, this is another side to human life. Okay, so that gives you a sense of the kind of music that was around.
the time. Now, literature, obviously I've mentioned Shakespeare a bit, along the way here, but there were other writers. This was a golden age of literature, so it's not just Shakespeare. Shakespeare was the greatest, but we get travel books, a lot of travel writing, because remember, people could sail around the world, and especially when they got to really distant places like Japan, they'd write all sorts of extraordinary things. They talk about going into Africa and finding people with two heads, okay? Or people who live upside down. They walk on their hands and their feet are sticking up in it. Usually these books begin with something that you can believe and get more and more fantastic as they go on. So they're interesting to read, because how much did people believe of those sorts of stories in those days? But people were interested in the bigger world, obviously. And you've got history books. You've got Hollinshead is the one that Shakespeare mostly used. Shakespeare's stories are mostly not just imagination. They are history stories, or they are stories that he took from somewhere else. And his history plays mostly came from this man, Hollinshead. He had obviously had Hollinshead's books, and he read them carefully when he was writing his history plays, and he copied details from those books. So history books, and we've got poetry. Thomas Wyatt was the one who was suspected of being in love with Anne Boleyn, and was nearly put to death with the others, but he survived somehow. There were others: Edmund Spenser, Philip Sidney, Thomas Nash, Thomas Lodge. You've got these famous writers: Robert Greene, Kidd, Marlowe. So writing drama, writing prose, writing early fiction, all kinds of different sort of genres are kind of beginning to develop at this time. So we've got a lot happening in literature. We've got all of these different figures, and of course Shakespeare is the one that we really recognize. Most people would probably recognize that one, but they wouldn't recognize a lot of the others. It's interesting, though, that when he was alive, Shakespeare wasn't the big, famous person that he became after he died. These people were all famous in those days. And then, after he died, for some reason, his plays continued to be popular. People carried on wanting to know about Shakespeare and what he wrote. And the others, many of them kind of got forgotten and not read so much as time went by. So slowly, Shakespeare grew up until he became the kind of giant of literature that we think of him as today. But he wasn't originally considered like that in his lifetime. He was good, he was popular, but he wasn't even terribly respected, because he was a little bit like, his drama was a little bit like the Hollywood of today. Poor people would go for some exciting drama. Okay? We think of him as like, very high level, very difficult to understand. Oh, you study Shakespeare. He's got lots of very rude jokes, very rude sexual jokes, and he's got lots of violence and blood, and he is attracting every kind of person. He wasn't seen in those days as high level. He was for the ordinary people. Come on in, pay your 2 pennies and come on in. All right? Fill the place up, and let's have some money here. And popular stuff like Hollywood today. Okay? So he wasn't considered to be sort of essential kind of high-level literature in his own day. And I want to say we do tend to focus an awful lot on the men. And when I went to university, it was all dead white men. Okay? It was all dead white men. I didn't hear about any women until I started doing my own research, postgraduate, and And then I started finding out about some of the women, okay? Henry VIII's last wife, for example, or Elizabeth I herself. As we saw, she wrote poetry, she translated works, and so on. Mary Herbert was mentioned as one of the great writers of her time. All right? As we said before, most women got little or no education, so they didn't have much chance. But there were writers who were women, and this is the beginning, really. This is the first time when women start writing literature that is not connected with religion. Okay? In the 15th century, there are some famous women writers. 14th and 15th century, 2 or 3 very famous writers, but it's religion only. We come through into this period, and they're starting to write about more general topics. Okay? So that's something to notice in the kind of development of literature. So we've got Queen Elizabeth there, for example. I'm going to give you an actual poem, all right? So this is going to take a little bit longer. Are you okay for it? You up for it? An actual poem by William Shakespeare, okay? Okay, now we all think that William Shakespeare, as I say, we think of him as very serious, so we tend to think, oh, sonke, literature, bungaku, poetry, you know. I want us to try and get that out of our heads, so I'm giving you a more comic picture of Shakespeare, and I'd like you to meet William Shakespeare. He's actually talking to us. Here he is. And what is he saying? Do you know what he's saying? I know what he's saying. He's saying in his most famous poem, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" Do you know this poem? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a day. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his golden complexion dim, that every fair from fair sometime declines, by chance when it is changing course untrimmed. It should be moving on to the second part. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe, or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. Well, what do you think? And the first thing to notice is that, although it might seem difficult to understand, most of the words we recognize. Most of the language is English, the same English I'm speaking. It's not Old English. We talked about this before, right? It's not Old English, it's early modern English. Okay? So let's just a little bit this is what it would have looked like. This is the original 1807 edition, published without Shakespeare's permission in 1807. And, well, shall I compare, sorry, I should go back really from there. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Shall I compare you? Okay, thee just means you. Shall I compare you to a summer's day? Okay? He does say, thou art more lovely, you are more lovely and more temperate. You are better than a summer's day. So we've got what very often happens in Western poetry, we've got a plus and a negative. Okay? The positive side is you, and the negative side is the summer's day. You beat a summer's day. Okay? If you're reading Western poetry, it's very often a good idea to look for the positive and negative in the poem, because it's typical to find that in poetry. Okay? In this case, you beat a summer's day. All right? And then he carries on saying things like, rough winds do shake the darling buds of May. Well, logically, when somebody starts like that, says, shall I compare you to a summer's day? You win. And then if they're going to carry on, they're going to talk about you, or they're going to talk about the summer's day. Logic, normally, unless they're going to completely talk about something different. Doesn't make much sense. So, this third line, is he talking about you, or is he talking about the summer's day? Pretty obviously talking about a summer's day, isn't it? And because the summer's day is negative, he's talking about what's wrong with the summer's day. He's already said, you beat a summer's day, and now he's saying because. Okay? And he's going to carry on for several lines saying because. This is what's wrong with a summer's day. Okay? You're more lovely, you beat a summer's day, because rough winds do shake the darling buds of May. Something like this. Okay, well, it's not very English, but you get the idea. Okay? A summer's day is sometimes too windy. Okay? And summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines. Well, I think I won't go into all too short a date because that's fairly clear. It's over. It finishes. It's too short. Okay? So even if you don't understand lease, it doesn't matter. You can get the idea. Sometimes it's too windy. Sometimes, anyway, it's too short. Okay? He says it's too short. All right. And then he says, sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines. What is the eye of heaven? It's the sun, right? It's the sun. Okay? Sometimes too hot the eye of heaven shines. The word order is different. We normally say the eye of heaven shines too hot. But, we can get the basic idea here. Okay? Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines. All right? So, it's too windy. Let's go into the negative things. Why is it negative? Why is it negative? Because it's too windy, too short, too hot sometimes. Okay? Sometimes too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed. So what do you think that means if the eye of heaven's gold complexion is dimmed? I like making a light dim. It's cloudy. That's right. So sometimes it's too hot, and then other times you think, let's go out, have a nice picnic, and oh heck, it's cloudy. Okay? You can't win. All right? So too cloudy. Okay, these are sometimes. All right. And then he says, every fair from fair sometime declines. By chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. Every fair, meaning every beautiful thing. From fair, from being beautiful, sometimes declines. No beautiful thing is beautiful forever. Sometimes it will stop being beautiful. By chance, it's broken. Okay, you broke your beautiful treasure. Or nature's changing course untrimmed. Just naturally, beautiful things in the end will stop being beautiful. They'll grow old, they'll die. Okay? So every beautiful thing will one day lose its beauty. Okay? Now, it was typical in the sonnet. This is a sonnet, okay? It's got 14 lines going dum de dum de dum de dum de dum, okay? Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate, okay? Dum de dum de dum de dum de dum. And it's typical in the Italian sonnet to change topic after the first 8 lines. So the second lines have a sort of different focus. And Shakespeare does that, but then he sums it up with a final 2 lines at the end. So he's changing topic now, which is typical in the sonnet. He's given all the reasons why a summer's day is not so good as you. All right, thou. And then he says, but thy eternal summer shall not fade. All right, your eternal summer will go on and on and on. It will never fade. Okay? So your plus is that your summer lasts forever. Right? What he's saying. Does that make any sense? Does that make any sense at all? I mean, why? Thy eternal summer shall not fade. Well, that's what he says, okay? Let's think about it later on. Nor lose possession of that fair thou owest. Okay? It won't lose possession, it won't lose its beauty. Every fair from fair sometimes declines, but your fair, you'll always have it. Owest means own it. You own it. You own it. You have. All right? So you'll always have your beauty. You always have your beauty. And then he says, nor shall death brag, thou wanderest in his shade. To brag is to boast. Okay? Na, 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 na. I got you, I got you. Death will never be able to say this to you. Okay? Nor can death brag, thou wanderest in his shade. Death will never get you. Death will never be able to hold you. Okay? Again, does that make much sense? What does he mean? Okay? You will never die, okay? You will never die, basically, he's saying. Alright? Death will never be able to boast that it's got you. When in eternal lines to time thou growest, you will continue to grow in eternal lines. You know that word eternal? I mean, lasts forever, never stops, goes on and on and on. In eternal lines to time thou growest. Now this is getting difficult. What does he mean? What's he talking about? In eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this. And this gives life to thee. So this must be some sort of explanation of why this person will never die. Why this person will have a beauty that lasts forever. Because this person grows in eternal lines. And so long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this. And this gives life to thee. So what is this? If you know, don't say. Give people a chance to think. What is this that gives life to thee? What could it be? What is it that makes it possible for this person to have eternal beauty and never die? Peace lives and Because this lives, you live. As long as men have eyes, okay, or as long as men can breathe, or as long as men have eyes, if they can breathe, and if they have eyes, then this will continue to live. What is this that lives, that gives life to thee? Does anybody actually know already? Does anybody have any ideas? Anyone want to make a guess? So long as this. Eternal lines. What lines is he talking about? The lines of the poem. So long lives this. This poem lives. As long as men can breathe, they can speak the poem. As long as they have eyes that can see, they can read the poem. And as long as the poem lives, then you live on, and you are beautiful forever in this poem. Oh, wow. It's not really you after all, is it? It's poetry that lives forever. Okay? You live forever, and you are beautiful forever because of my poem. He wasn't modest. Okay? He figured that 400 years later, people would be reading his poem, and that this person would be beautiful 400 years later for people maybe in Japan, all right, on the other side of the world, reading it, listening to it, hearing it. Okay? So long lives this poem, and this poem gives life to you. All right? So that's Shakespeare's most famous sonnet, so I thought you might like to know it. And yeah, that was my hint, okay? This book, this poem, all right? But you got there. Well done. Okay, so that's about it, really. Okay. Well, I was saying that's all for this week because it was supposed to finish last week. We didn't finish it last week, so it's not all for this week. We've got more coming up, all right? I'll give you a couple of minutes just to sort of relax after the presentation, and I've got a little bit more for you about this Elizabethan period. And then I'm hoping you're going to have a bit of time to do the work that's on your print. Okay? Good. So